At 28, I collapsed at work from a brain aneurysm. While doctors rushed me into emergency surgery, my family was in Tuscany choosing my sister's wedding venue. The hospital called them one by one. Hours later, my sister said they were not coming home. So the hospital moved down my emergency contact list and called the one name my mother had spent years trying to erase. Welcome back to Rose Untold Stories. Here we tell emotional stories about families, secrets, betrayal, and the quiet moments that change everything. These are stories about people who were ignored for too long, asked to carry too much, or made to feel like love was something they had to earn. My name is Anna. I am 30 years old. I am a manuscripts archivist at a research library in the city where I live. I read other people's lives in their own handwriting for a living. I keep records because somebody has to. It happened in late April. I was at my desk at the library, cataloging a small collection of letters from the 1840s. The handwriting was hard to read. I had been working on the same page for almost an hour when I leaned back to stretch my neck. The pain that came up the back of my head was unlike anything I had ever felt. Susan, the senior reference librarian on duty that morning, later told me I described it as a string being pulled too tight inside my skull. I do not remember saying that. I remember the room moving. I remember the floor coming up. I remember Susan's voice getting sharp in a way I had never heard before. I remember somebody telling a 911 operator that I had collapsed and was saying it was the worst headache of my life. And I remember thinking, in the small, clear way that only a person who is about to lose consciousness thinks, that I had not yet finished the letter I had been reading. Over the next 2 days, I came in and out of consciousness in the neurology ICU. I had been operated on soon after the rupture. They had clipped the aneurysm. They had stabilized me. They had told Susan, who had ridden with me to the hospital because no one else from my family was there, that I had been very lucky. They had also told her that the next stretch of recovery would decide what kind of life I would be walking back into. Susan stayed in the waiting room as long as she could. She answered questions when the nurses needed someone who had seen me collapse. She told them what time the pain started. She told them what I had said. She told them what I had been doing when I fell. The official calls, I later learned, had not come from Susan. The hospital had called my mother first. She had not picked up. At the time, she had been on an overseas flight to Italy. I had not known she was leaving that day, because we had not spoken since the previous Sunday. She had been traveling for my sister Olivia's destination wedding. Olivia is 2 years younger than me. She and her fiancé Cooper had gotten engaged the previous Christmas and decided almost immediately that they wanted a destination wedding in Italy. Cooper's family had connections there. Cooper's mother had introduced my mother Linda to a wedding planner. The spring trip was a planning trip. My mother, my father James, Olivia, Cooper, and Cooper's parents had gone over to look at venues, taste menus, meet vendors, and walk through the church Cooper's grandmother had been married in. While I was being rushed into emergency brain surgery, I would later learn they were at a vineyard in Tuscany, choosing the place where Olivia would get married. The hospital tried my father next. He did not pick up either. I was told later that he had given his phone to my mother to take photos with because his own phone had a cracked screen. After that, a hospital social worker called Olivia. According to the notes in my file, Olivia picked up. The social worker told her what had happened. She told Olivia I was in emergency surgery. She asked whether anyone in the family would be coming home. Olivia said she did not know. She said she would call our mother. She said she would call back. She did not call back for a long time. When she did, according to what the social worker wrote down, Olivia said the family had discussed it. The flights were complicated. The deposits were non-refundable. The venue contracts were being signed that week. She said the surgery was already done and there was nothing they could do from Italy. She said my mother had wanted to come back. Then she said the family would see me when they got home. The social worker documented the call in my file. Later, after I was discharged, I requested a copy of the relevant records. I have kept that note ever since. It is in the same drawer where I keep the other things. There is something I have to be careful about here because what I am about to describe was told to me later. I was sedated. At times, I was not fully aware of what was happening around me. But what I have been told is that sometime during those first 2 days, when the nurses were trying to bring me up enough to assess cognitive function, I said a name. The name was Joanne. I do not remember saying it. I had not seen the woman whose name I said since I was in high school. I had spoken her name aloud, to my knowledge, only a handful of times since then. But the brain, when it is frightened, reaches for the people it has decided are safe. Somewhere inside me, Joanne was one of those people. When I said her name, the nurse checked the emergency contact information the hospital had on file. Years earlier, after the only Christmas card from Joanne ever reached me, I had looked her up and added her as an alternate emergency contact during my first routine appointment as an adult in the same hospital system. I had never called her, I had never used the number. I only remember not wanting my mother, my father, and Olivia to be the only people listed if something ever happened to me. My mother was first, my father was listed after her. Olivia was next. Aunt Joanne was the last name on the page. By then, the hospital had already called the people who were supposed to come first. None of them were coming. So the nurse called the last number. Joanne picked up. She drove in from a small town several hours away that night. By the time morning light reached the ICU windows, she was sitting beside my bed. What I have been told is that Joanne sat in the chair next to my bed through the night and into the next morning. She did not leave. She had packed quickly and brought a small bag with 2 changes of clothes, a paperback book, and a pair of slippers. I woke up on the 3rd morning. The light through the ICU window was gray. A nurse was standing beside my bed, checking the monitors. When she saw my eyes open, she leaned closer and asked if I knew my name. I tried to answer, but the words would not come out right. Then the nurse looked toward the door and said, "She's awake." A few moments later, Aunt Joanne stepped into the room. Later, I learned she had spent most of the night in the family waiting area, coming in only when the nurses allowed it. She looked at me and smiled. "Hi, honey," she said. "It's your Aunt Joanne." "I am here," I cried. She took my hand carefully and stayed quiet, as if she understood that, for now, being there was enough. Severezi Aunt Joanne stayed with me through the hospital days that followed. She barely left, except to rest in the family waiting area. She wrote down everything the doctors said. She knew what to ask because she had spent 30 years as a hospice nurse. She made sure nobody moved me, discharged me, or changed my care plan without explaining why. She was, in the way that some people are in a hospital room, exactly the right person to have there. My mother called the hospital twice from Italy during that first week. The first call came while I was still in the ICU and not fully awake. A nurse told me later that my mother had asked for an update. She had said she was sorry. She had said she loved me. She had said the family was thinking of me. Then, before the call ended, she had also told the nurse that the vineyard had been confirmed and Olivia was very happy. She had asked whether I was being well taken care of. The nurse had told her yes. I did not hear that call myself. I only learned about it later. The second call came later that week when I was awake enough to understand short conversations. My mother spoke to me for a few minutes. She told me she had heard from a cousin that Aunt Joanne was at the hospital with me. Her voice changed when she said the name. She asked me how Joanne had ended up there. She asked me if I had called her. I told her no. I told her the hospital had called her. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she told me she did not want me to get the wrong impression of her sister. She said Joanne had a way of making herself useful in family crises, as a way of inserting herself back into a family she had hurt many years ago. She told me I should be careful what I said to her. I told her, okay. I did not tell her that somewhere in the previous 2 days, I had stopped trusting anything my mother told me about anyone. Aunt Joanne took me home from the hospital when I was well enough to leave. She had stocked my apartment with groceries. She had made the bed with clean sheets. She had set up a small folding table next to the couch with a water glass, my medications, and a notepad. She stayed with me for several more days. She slept on the couch. She made meals. She walked with me, slowly, around the block in the afternoons. One evening, I asked her why she had stayed away for so many years. She did not answer for a long time. Then she sat down across from me at the kitchen table and told me a version of my own family I had not been allowed to hear before. She told me she and my mother had been close when they were young. She told me my mother had always been difficult, and that Joanne had spent years going along with it because that was what older sisters of difficult women learned to do. Then, when I was in high school and Olivia was in middle school, Joanne had finally said something. She told my mother she was being too hard on me. She told her she was favoring Olivia in a way that was going to leave a mark. She told her, in the calm voice my mother hated most, that I was old enough to understand what was happening and young enough to be hurt by it. My mother had not responded that day. She had waited. Then she told Joanne she was no longer welcome at family events. Joanne told me she had tried for years to maintain contact with me. She had sent birthday cards. She had sent Christmas cards. She had called twice. My mother had intercepted everything she could. The Christmas card I received when I was 18 was the only one that had reached me. Joanne told me my mother had not cut her off because she had hurt the family. She had cut her off because Joanne had been the first person to say out loud that Olivia was being favored and I was being erased. I did not say anything for a long time. Then I asked her how she had known to come. She told me the call had come late in the evening. The nurse had said my name. Joanne had not heard my name on a telephone in more years than either of us wanted to count. She had not had to think about whether to come. She had packed and gotten in the car. She told me she had been hoping for all those years that I would one day put her on a piece of paper somewhere. Aunt Joanne went back home after I was stable enough to be alone for short stretches. She told me she would come back if I needed her. She told me to call her any time. I went back to work part-time after the first phase of recovery. My speech had recovered. My memory had small gaps I did not know I had until I reached for something that should have been there. I had headaches in the mornings for months. They went away gradually. The neurologist told me the long-term prognosis was good. The doctors expected the clip to hold. I would be on blood pressure medication for the rest of my life. The aneurysm had taught my body something it would not unlearn. By the time Aunt Joanne took me home, my family had already returned from Italy. They had stayed for the full trip. They had finalized the venue. They had finalized the menu. They had picked the flowers. They had walked through the church. My mother came over to my apartment after she got back. She brought a small wrapped box with her. Inside was a wedding favor sample, a porcelain dish painted with grapes, and the date of Olivia's wedding. She wanted my opinion. She wanted to know if I thought the gold edge was too much. She did not ask me about my surgery. She did not ask me about my recovery. She did not ask me about my aunt. She stayed for less than an hour. She left with the porcelain dish back in her purse. She told me I was looking well. The wedding took place that fall. I attended. I wore a navy dress. I sat at a small round table near the back of the room with 3 of Cooper's distant relatives who did not know who I was. My mother had not wanted me at the head table because the photographs were going to be in a wedding magazine, and she wanted Olivia's wedding party to look cohesive. She told me this before the wedding. I said okay. Aunt Joanne had been invited only after I insisted. She came. She sat at my table. She introduced herself to Cooper's relatives with grace. Before the reception, my father pulled her aside and apologized for not being kinder to her over the years. My father is a quiet man. He had been quiet about a great many things in my life. I watched him from across the room while he spoke to my aunt, and I thought, for the first time, that he might be a man capable of telling the truth if he was given the chance. A few weeks before the wedding, on a night I could not sleep, I recorded a voice memo on my phone. I said the date out loud. I said my name. I said I was recording it because life had already taught me how quickly an ordinary morning could disappear, and because I wanted to leave a record that I had been alone in the hospital while my family had been in Italy looking at a vineyard. I described the pain. I described Susan calling 911. I described the empty visitor chair. I described the hospital moving down the emergency contact list because no one else was coming. I described what it felt like to wake up alone and not yet know that my aunt was on her way. I did not record it to punish anyone. I recorded it because I needed something to remember the truth without softening it. I saved the file in a folder on my phone, labeled only with the date. I did not open it again for 16 months. 16 months after the aneurysm, my mother called me. She told me my father had been diagnosed with ALS. He had been experiencing weakness in his right hand for months. He had finally seen a neurologist. The tests had come back definitive. The diagnosis was ALS. It was progressive. It would take his strength slowly, and then not slowly. Eventually, he would need full-time care. I told my mother I was sorry. I told her I loved them both. I asked her what she needed. She told me she had been thinking about that. She told me she and my father had talked. She told me they had also spoken to Olivia and Cooper. She told me the family had come to the conclusion that the best thing for my father would be for me to come home. She told me my work as an archivist was interesting, but not the kind of career that could not be paused for a few years. She told me my apartment was a rental, not a home. She told me Olivia had a marriage to focus on and was already talking about having a baby. She told me my father did not want strangers in the house and would not accept professional care. Then she said she needed me to give my notice at the library. She needed me to come home and be the daughter she could rely on. I did not say anything for a long time. Then I told her I would come for dinner that weekend. I told her I would think about everything she had said. I told her we could talk then. I hung up the phone. Then I called Aunt Joanne. I told her what my mother had asked. I told her my father had ALS. I told her I did not know what to do. She did not answer for a moment. Then she told me she was sorry to hear about my father. She told me she had loved him once, in the way a person loves the husband of a sister they had once been close with. Then she told me something I have remembered every day since. She said care is not the same thing as surrender. She told me my father deserved good care. She told me he also deserved a daughter who was still herself. She told me those two things were not in conflict if I did not let them be. She told me she had spent 30 years in hospice and had watched, more times than she could count, what happened to daughters who said yes to everything. She told me she was not going to watch it happen to me. Then she helped me think through a plan. I drove to my parents' house that weekend with that plan in my bag, a folder of options, and my phone with the recording from 16 months earlier still saved on it. Aunt Joanne had helped me prepare. We had spent 2 long phone calls walking through what realistic ALS care looked like. She introduced me to a former colleague who specialized in ALS home care services. The colleague sent information packets. I read them. I researched costs. I built a budget. I also opened the voice memo from 16 months before. I listened to it once, in the dark, at my kitchen table. I could not listen to it again, but I knew what was on it. When I arrived, Olivia and Cooper were already there. My father was already at the dining room table, one hand weaker than the other, his cane leaning against the chair. The right side of his body had begun to weaken visibly. His face had not changed much yet. His voice was still his. He saw me come in. He said my name. He did not stand up. I went over and sat beside him. I told him I was glad to see him. He squeezed my hand with his left hand, the one that still worked properly. He held on for a few seconds longer than usual. My mother served dinner as if this were an ordinary family meal. For the first part of dinner, nobody mentioned ALS. Nobody mentioned the phone call. Nobody mentioned the fact that I had been asked to give up my life. Then, as my mother passed the bread basket to my father, she shifted. She told me she was glad I had come. She told me she wanted to talk about the plan for my father's care. She told me she had spoken to Olivia and Cooper, and that they were all on the same page. The plan, she told me, was straightforward. I would give notice at the library. I would move into my old bedroom. I would become Dad's day-to-day care. My mother would handle the household and insurance. Olivia would visit on weekends when she could. Cooper would help with heavier physical things when he was around. My mother called it a family plan. I noticed I was the only person losing a life. She told me they had thought about it carefully. She told me they had not made the decision lightly. She told me they understood it was a sacrifice. Then she told me she knew in her heart that I would do the right thing for the family. She finished. Olivia looked at me. Cooper looked at me. My father looked at his plate. I did not speak for almost 20 seconds. Then I took my phone out of my bag and set it on the table between us. I told them I wanted them to hear something before I gave my answer. My mother asked me what it was. I told her it was a voice memo I had recorded 16 months earlier, before Olivia's wedding, on a night I had not been able to sleep. I opened the file. I pressed play. My own voice came out of the phone speaker. The voice was tired. It was younger than my voice was now. It said the date. It said my name. It said I was recording this because I might not be able to say it any other way, and because somebody needed to hear it eventually, even if that somebody was just me. The voice described the morning at the library. The rupture. The floor coming up. Susan's voice calling 911. The empty visitor chair beside the ICU bed. The hospital moving down my emergency contact list after my family decided not to come home. The name Joanne leaving my mouth in a room I could not remember being in. My aunt sitting in the chair the next morning. The porcelain wedding favor my mother brought to my apartment after she came back. The navy dress I wore at the back table of Olivia's wedding. The voice did not accuse anyone. It just described. When the voice memo ended, I left my phone on the table. The kitchen was very quiet. My mother had set down her fork early in the recording. She had not picked it back up. Olivia was looking at her hands. Cooper was looking at Olivia. My father was looking at me directly now, not past me. Not through the space where I was supposed to agree. At me. I did not let the silence break me. I had practiced for this. I was not quitting my job. I was not moving home. I was not giving up the life I had rebuilt after they left me alone. But I had come with a different plan. Aunt Joanne had helped me find a home care agency experienced with ALS patients that served their area. I had a sample care plan, pricing, and a schedule that did not require me to disappear. I would pay 1/3 from the salary I intended to keep earning. My parents would pay 1/3 from my father's pension and their savings. Olivia and Cooper would pay the final third. If Olivia needed money, she could postpone the apartment renovation. I had postponed my own life once for this family. I was not doing it again. I would come home 1 weekend a month. I would manage the medical coordination, attend appointments by phone or video, and speak with the home care agency every week. I would help. But I would not quit my job, move home, or disappear. My mother started to cry. I let her cry. Olivia spoke first, but not with an apology. She said they had not understood how bad it was. She said the doctors had already done the surgery. She said everyone had told them I was stable. She said they had thought coming back would not change anything. I looked at her and told her they had known enough to decide not to come home. Nobody spoke. Olivia looked down at her hands again. When she looked back up, her face had changed. Then she apologized. She apologized for the wedding. She apologized for Italy. She apologized for the back table. She told me she had not understood at the time how bad it had been because she had not let herself understand. She told me she was sorry. I believed her, in part. I told her I would believe her more when I saw what she did. Cooper did not speak. Cooper looked at his wife in a way that suggested he had been thinking about some of this for longer than he had said. My father set his cane against the table. He looked at me. He used his left hand, the one that still worked, to reach across the table for my hand. He held it. My father looked at me and said he was sorry. Not the kind of sorry people say to end a conversation. The kind that had been sitting inside him for years and had finally found a way out. Then he said he agreed with my plan. He told my mother, in a voice that was rougher than usual but very clear, that we were going to do it the way I had described it. My mother did not argue. She had been outvoted at her own table for the first time in her life, and she was not yet sure how to come back from it. We did not finish the chicken. The dinner ended with my mother in the kitchen, washing dishes, Olivia helping her, and my father sitting across from me at the table, holding my hand for a long time without saying anything. I drove home that night. That was almost a year ago. The ALS care plan is in place. The home care agency has been excellent. My father has a primary nurse, a woman named Donna, who has been with him since the beginning. She knows him. He calls her by name. She reads to him when his eyes get too tired to follow the page on his own. ALS has taken much of his right side strength over the last year. He still walks with a cane. He has good days and harder ones. His mind is still his voice is still his. I drive down 1 weekend a month. Olivia drives down the other Saturdays she can manage, which has been most of them. Cooper has been kind. My mother has not become a different person, but she has become quieter around the parts of my life she no longer controls. She does the insurance paperwork. She manages the household. She and I are not close. We're speaking. That is more than I would have expected a year ago. Aunt Joanne moved closer. She sold the house she had lived in for years and bought a smaller one close enough that seeing each other no longer required planning around distance. She told me she wanted to be closer to me. She also told me with a small smile that she wanted to be close enough to reach the hospital quickly if she ever had to do it again, which she would not, because nothing was going to happen. We have lunch every other week. She comes to my apartment. She brings the things she has cooked. She tells me about the small garden she has put in behind the new house. She has met my father twice. She drove me to his birthday at my parents' house last summer. She walked into the house without flinching. My mother was polite to her, in the way that a woman who has not had to be polite to her sister in a long time has to relearn how to do. I kept the voice memo, the hospital note, and the navy dress from Olivia's wedding folded in the back of my closet. I also kept the card my father sent after the family dinner, written in his small, unsteady handwriting. The card said, "I am sorry it took me this long to see you. I am here now. I have kept all of it, because I am, in my work and in my life, a person who keeps records. I keep them because nobody else will. And because the people who are most dismissed in a family are usually the people who remember most clearly what happened. Who in your life decided your hardest moment was less important than their happiest one? Drop your story in the comments. I want to know who is here with me tonight, what city you are watching from, and what time it is where you are. There is one thing I learned from all of this, and it is the last thing I will share. The family that does not show up for you is also the family that will ask you, later, to give up the life you built without them. You do not owe them the life you built without them. You can love them. You can help them. But you do not have to disappear for people who were not there when it mattered. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. I am here every week with stories about people who were ignored for too long and finally chose themselves. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.